The story of the Honjo Masamune begins with its maker, Goro Nyudo Masamune, often hailed as the greatest swordsmith in Japanese history. Living during the late Kamakura period, roughly the 13th to 14th centuries, Masamune transformed the art of sword-making into something mystical. Japan was a land of endless warfare, where clans clashed in ceaseless battles, and the demand for durable, sharp, and beautiful swords was unending. Masamune's genius lay in his mastery of temagane, the traditional steel smelted from iron sand. Using a delicate balance of fire and hammer, he forged blades that were both razor-sharp and astonishingly resilient. Unlike other swordsmiths of his time, who often created brittle edges or overly flexible spines, Masamune perfected the hamon, the wavy temper line that reflected both the function and beauty of his swords. His creations combined hardness with flexibility, allowing them to slice effortlessly while resisting shattering under impact. But beyond the science of metallurgy, Masamune's work carried a spiritual aura. In Japanese tradition, a sword was not merely a weapon but a vessel of the soul. Legends claimed that Masamune's swords embodied purity. They were said to cut only what deserved to be cut. One famous tale tells of a test where two swords were placed in a river. The blade made by Masamune's rival Muramasa cut everything that floated past, leaves, fish, even the air. But Masamune's blade cut nothing, letting harmless things float by while striking only when necessary. The observers declared Masamune's work divine, for it held restraint as well as strength. The Honjo Masamune, the most famous of all his creations, would come to symbolize this legacy. But before it gained renown, it was simply one of Masamune's many blades, forged in silence, yet destined for centuries of blood, glory, and mystery. Its journey would outlive countless wars, dynasties, and even the samurai themselves. To understand a Honjo Masamune is to understand Japan's identity, one forged in discipline, honor, and the steel of a master swordsmith. The exact moment when the Honjo Masamune was forged is lost to history, hidden in the mists of medieval Japan. What we do know is that it emerged sometime during the late Kamakura or early Nambokucho period, when civil wars tore the nation apart. It was an age when a katana was not just a warrior's tool, but also the mark of status and spirit. Among Masamune's many masterworks, this one blade would rise above the rest. The Honjo Masamune was named after General Honjo Shijinaga, who in the 16th century wielded it during battle. It was said that the sword cleaved through his helmet, splitting it open, but remarkably, Shijinaga survived. Impressed by the weapon's power and resilience, he claimed it as his own, and the blade thereafter carried his name. In Japanese culture, names given to swords often came from legendary owners or fateful events, and this sword's baptism in war made it unforgettable. What made the Honjo Masamune unique was not only its craftsmanship, but also the aura it carried. Contemporary accounts praise its balance and lethal sharpness, but warriors also believe it held spiritual weight. It was not just an implement of violence. It was destiny in steel. Swords in Japan were often passed down through generations, becoming treasured heirlooms, and the Honjo Masamune would soon rise to that role. As centuries passed, the sword traveled across battlefields and into the hands of noble families. Eventually, it was acquired by the powerful Tokugawa clan, who would rise to unify Japan under the shogunate. The Honjo Masamune was chosen to symbolize their authority. More than a weapon, it became a token of legitimacy, proof that the Tokugawa ruled not just by might, but by heritage linked to Japan's greatest swordsmith. For over 250 years, the Honjo Masamune remained with the Tokugawa shoguns, safeguarded as a national treasure. It represented not only martial dominance, but also order, stability, and the divine right to govern. Just as European monarchs guarded their crowns and scepters, Japan's shogunate held the Honjo Masamune as a sacred emblem of rule. From its mysterious forging in Masamune's forge to its place in the halls of shogunal power, the Honjo Masamune had transcended its role as a blade. It had become the spirit of a nation. Yet fate is cruel, and the sword's journey would not end with glory. Instead, its destiny would take it into the chaos of modern Japan, where honor and tradition clashed with modernization and war. And in the end, the greatest sword ever made would vanish without a trace. To understand why the Honjo Masamune mattered, so deeply, we must first step into the world of samurai. For centuries, these warriors lived and died by the blade, guided by Bushido, the way of the warrior. Honor, loyalty, and courage defined their existence, and a katana was a physical manifestation of their spirit. Unlike the heavy swords of Europe, the Japanese katana was elegant and precise. Curved, single-edged, and razor-sharp, it was designed for quick, lethal strikes. More than a tool of war, it was a companion. Samurai refer to their swords as their soul, and families often passed blades down as sacred heirlooms. The katana also held ritual significance. When a samurai committed seppuku, ritual suicide to preserve honor, the blade used was often his own. Temples blessed swords, poets sang of them, and smiths treated their forging as holy acts. Owning a blade forged by Masamune was considered a privilege reserved for the highest ranks. His work represented perfection in martial form, blending deadly utility with divine craftsmanship. In this context, the Honjo Masamune's importance grew. It wasn't merely steel, it was an icon of power, faith, and tradition. The Tokugawa shoguns, who ruled Japan from 1603 to 1868, understood this well. By claiming the sword, they weren't just displaying wealth. They were binding themselves to the heritage of the samurai and the spiritual authority of Masamune. The Honjo Masamune stood at the center of ceremonies, guarded like a relic to the Tokugawa. It was their crown jewel, as essential as the imperial regalia of Japan. Its possession symbolized legitimacy. Without it, their claim to leadership would have seemed incomplete. In fact, its symbolic weight was so great that it was classified as a kuho, a national treasure of Japan. But even as the samurai revered their blades, Japan was changing. The age of the sword was slowly fading. By the mid-19th century, with the Meiji Restoration and the introduction of firearms, the samurai's way of life was under threat. Yet the Honjo Masamune remained untouched, hidden in the vaults of tradition, still carrying the weight of centuries of honor. The sword had already crossed eras of war and peace, but would soon face its greatest trial, not on the battlefield, but in a modern world where emperors, generals, and foreign occupiers would decide its fate. The soul of Japan, embodied in the Honjo Masamune, was destined for both reverence and tragedy. The Honjo Masamune did not simply rest in display cases or ceremonial halls. Before it became the emblem of power for the Tokugawa shogunate, it was a warrior's blade tested in the fury of battle. Its earliest known appearance in history was during the late Sengoku period, a century defined by endless wars between rival clans for dominance over Japan. It was here that the sword earned its name. In the mid-16th century, during a violent clash, the blade struck General Honjo Shijinaga's helmet with such force that it split the steel open. Most swords would have shattered or bent under such resistance, but the Honjo Masamune cut through without breaking, proving its masterwork resilience. Shijinaga survived the strike, but the awe it inspired led him to claim the sword as his own. From that moment onward, the blade carried his name, forever linking his legacy with Masamune's craftsmanship. This was no ordinary weapon. It was a living force on the battlefield. Samurai wielding a Masamune blade were said to feel the spirit of the sword guiding them, steadying their hands, sharpening their resolve. The Honjo Masamune, forged in fire centuries earlier, was fulfilling its purpose in the chaos of war. But war in Japan was not just about skill with the blade. It was about symbolism. To own a sword like the Honjo Masamune was to carry prestige into battle. It was more than a weapon of death. It was a banner of legitimacy. Each time the blade was unsheathed, it was as though the past, the spirit of Masamune himself, was summoned onto the field. Eventually, through a series of victories and transfers, the Honjo Masamune fell into possession of the Tokugawa clan. This was no coincidence. In the storm of Japan's wars, when power shifted constantly, possessing such a legendary blade was itself a statement that the bearer was not merely a warlord but a rightful ruler. For the Tokugawa, the Honjo Masamune became far more than a weapon. It became a legacy, a symbol they would guard for generations. Its battlefield days ended, but its reputation, born in the smoke and blood of combat, would shape the destiny of a nation. When Tokugawa Ieyasu emerged victorious in 1600 at the Battle of Sekigahara, he did more than unify Japan. He established an era of stability that would last over 250 years. With the dawn of the Tokugawa shogunate, Japan entered the Edo period, a time of peace, order, and tightly controlled society. At the heart of this new power structure sat the Honjo Masamune. For the Tokugawa family, the sword was not merely a keepsake. It was their most prized possession, the very emblem of their right to rule. Just as a king might wear a crown or wield a scepter, the Tokugawa held the Honjo Masamune as their symbol of divine authority. In fact, it became part of the regalia that marked the transfer of leadership between shoguns. When power passed from one generation to the next, so too did the sword, like a torch carrying the flame of legitimacy. The Tokugawa were masters of symbolism. They understood that power rested not only on armies and politics, but also on ritual and perception. The Honjo Masamune, with its perfect craftsmanship and storied history, served as the ultimate expression of their dominance. It was displayed at key ceremonies and kept under the strictest guard. Its presence reinforced the idea that the Tokugawa were divinely sanctioned to rule Japan. Masamune's legendary purity, combined with the sword's battlefield legacy, merged seamlessly with the image the Tokugawa projected. Wise rulers who brought peace after centuries of chaos. In this sense, the Honjo Masamune was not only steel, it was propaganda, a myth given physical form. For centuries, the sword remained in Edo, passed carefully from shogun to shogun. It survived fires, floods, and political intrigue, always re-emerging as a shining emblem of the shogunate's enduring control. To lose it would have been unthinkable, a fracture in the image of Tokugawa authority. And so, the blade endured a silent witness to more than 2 centuries of peace and ritual. But history never stands still. By the mid-19th century, winds of change swept across Japan. The arrival of Western powers, the decline of samurai dominance, and the eventual collapse of the shogunate would place the Honjo Masamune at the edge of oblivion. From sacred relic, it would soon become a casualty of modernization, its fate tied to the very survival of the samurai class. For over 2.5 centuries, the Edo period defined Japan. It was a time of peace, strict social order, and flourishing culture. The Honjo Masamune, as the Tokugawa's most prized possession, became a silent guardian of this era. Unlike earlier centuries, where swords clashed on battlefields, the Edo period emphasized ritual over combat. Samurai still carried their katanas, but they were less warriors and more administrators, bound by loyalty to the shogun. Yet even in this time of relative calm, the symbolic role of swords grew stronger. The Honjo Masamune, held securely by the Tokugawa, was revered as a national treasure, a relic embodying the spirit of the warrior age that had brought about this peace. It was more than an artifact. It was living heritage. Visitors at Edo Castle who were permitted to view it often described the blade as breathtaking, flawless in form. To see the Honjo Masamune was to be reminded of both Japan's violent past and its fragile peace. During the Edo period, swordsmithing itself began to decline. With fewer wars, the demand for new blades lessened, and sword-making became more ceremonial than practical. This shift made Masamune's works even more revered. No living smith could replicate his genius, and so the Honjo Masamune grew in status with every passing year. It was irreplaceable, one-of-a-kind, and eternal. Generations of shoguns guarded it, understanding its importance. To lose the blade would not only be a personal loss, but a stain on the Tokugawa name. Thus, the Honjo Masamune remained carefully preserved through fires that devastated Edo, through the shifting tide of internal politics, and even through the gradual erosion of the shogunate's power in the 19th century. But history is merciless. By the mid-1800s, Japan could no longer resist outside influence. The arrival of Commodore Perry and the Black ships forced the country to open its ports. Western technology, guns, and industry began to pour in, disrupting centuries of tradition. And as Japan modernized, the samurai class, once the backbone of the nation, faced extinction. The Honjo Masamune, for centuries a symbol of strength and authority, would soon become a relic of a fading era. Its survival into the modern world was never guaranteed. As the samurai disappeared, so too did the sacred symbols that defined them. The greatest sword in Japanese history was about to face its most dangerous battle yet. Not against steel, but against time, politics, and war. By the mid-19th century, Japan stood on the edge of transformation. After more than 250 years of Tokugawa rule, Western powers had arrived with steamships, cannons, and new demands. The shogunate struggled to maintain control, but ultimately, the Meiji Restoration of 1868 dismantled the old order. The emperor was restored as head of state, and the age of the samurai came crashing to an end. With modernization came sweeping reforms. The new government sought to abolish the rigid class system that had defined Japan for centuries. Samurai, once elite warriors, were reduced to ordinary citizens. Their privileges were stripped away, and in 1876, the carrying of swords in public was outlawed by the Heitoriai Edict. What had once been a mark of honor became a reminder of a past the government wanted to bury. For the Honjo Masamune, this was a turning point. It had survived centuries of war and peace as the Tokugawa's sacred treasure, but now the family was no longer in power. After surrendering authority to the emperor, the Tokugawa lost much of their wealth and prestige. Their priceless heirlooms, including swords, armor, and relics, were dispersed, sold, or hidden away. Yet the Honjo Masamune retained its aura of importance. Even as the samurai disappeared, scholars, collectors, and nationalists recognized the blade as an unmatched masterpiece. Japan itself was changing, embracing trains, factories, and foreign weaponry. But the Honjo Masamune symbolized something eternal, a link to the spirit of Bushido. During the Meiji period, efforts were made to preserve Japan's cultural treasures. Temples, artworks, and historical swords were cataloged and designated as national treasures. The Honjo Masamune, naturally, was at the top of the list. It was no longer a weapon to be wielded, but an artifact of identity, a reminder of the soul of Japan, forged centuries earlier. Still, its fate grew more uncertain. Ownership passed between members of the Tokugawa family, who struggled with financial hardship. The sword's symbolic power endured, but it was now a relic in a rapidly modernizing nation. And yet, while modernization threatened many traditions, Japan never fully let go of its reverence for the sword. The Honjo Masamune was a paradox, a symbol of the old order, yet also a jewel of Japanese artistry that could not be erased. Its survival into the modern era seemed miraculous, but destiny was not finished with the sword. A new storm, greater than any civil war or political upheaval, was coming. It would be the Second World War that sealed the Honjo Masamune's mysterious fate. The early 20th century brought Japan into global conflicts. By the 1930s, militarism and expansionism defined the nation's policies, and once again, swords regained symbolic importance. Officers carried katanas as signs of honor, even if mass-produced blades lacked the craftsmanship of the past. But amid this new militarism, the true treasures, the ancient sword of Masamune, remained locked away, revered as untouchable relics. The Honjo Masamune was still in the possession of the Tokugawa family. Tokugawa Ieyasu, a descendant of the shogunal line, safeguarded along with other heirlooms. But when Japan lost World War II in 1945, everything changed. Under the terms of surrender, Allied forces, led by the United States, ordered the confiscation of all weapons. The Americans feared uprisings and demanded that all Japanese citizens turn over their swords, treating them not as art but as instruments of war. For the Japanese, this was a devastating blow. To surrender a family sword was to surrender history itself. Many families handed over priceless heirlooms, not realizing they were giving away treasures centuries old. In this chaos, the Honjo Masamune was lost. According to records, Tokugawa Ieyasu dutifully surrendered the sword, along with others, to a police station in Tokyo in December 1945. From there, it was handed to an American officer, identified only as Sergeant Cody Bymore. After that, the trail goes cold. The blade vanished, leaving behind only mystery. Did Bymore take it back to the United States as a souvenir? Was it destroyed, mistaken for an ordinary sword? Or does it still sit unrecognized in a private collection or attic somewhere, its true identity forgotten? No one knows. The disappearance of the Honjo Masamune was more than the loss of steel. It was the loss of a national treasure, declared a Kokuo, a national treasure of Japan, before the war. Its disappearance represented a cultural wound that has never healed. It was not just a sword. It was the embodiment of Masamune's genius, of samurai honor, of the Tokugawa legacy. And now it was gone. The Americans left Japan in the following years, but the Honjo Masamune never resurfaced. Decades later, historians, sword collectors, and even government officials have searched, but the sword remains one of the greatest mysteries of World War II. The mystery of the Honjo Masamune's disappearance has fueled countless theories. Some believe it was simply lost in the chaos of post-war occupation. Thousands of swords were melted down or discarded, and perhaps even the greatest of them all suffered such a fate. Others argue this is unthinkable. Surely someone must have recognized its importance. One of the most persistent stories involves Sergeant Cody Bymore, the American officer said to have received the sword. But searches for his name in military archives reveal nothing. Was the name misspelled? Was it a pseudonym? Or was the record itself mistaken? If Bymore existed, perhaps he took the sword home. It could be lying in a trunk, its identity unknown, somewhere in the United States. Collectors whisper of a day when it may resurface in an estate sale or auction, shocking the world. Another theory suggests deliberate concealment. Some believe the sword was never truly surrendered, that the Tokugawa family may have hidden it to protect it from foreign hands. If so, it could still rest in a secret vault or temple, shielded by sworn silence. Japanese tradition has often safeguarded relics in secrecy, passing knowledge only through trusted heirs. Others claim the Honjo Masamune left Japan altogether. Rumors persist that it was smuggled abroad, traded into private collections, or even hidden in European vaults. A few optimists argue it may one day be rediscovered, like other lost artifacts that reappear centuries later. Yet there are darker speculations. Some fear the sword was destroyed, melted down along with thousands of other weapons by Allied authorities. If true, the greatest sword ever forged may exist only as dust and memory. But many reject this idea, insisting its craftsmanship and inscription would have been recognized. The enduring mystery is part of the sword's legend. Its absence has elevated it beyond even what it was in life. The Honjo Masamune has become a ghost of Japan's past, a symbol not only of lost heritage, but the fragility of culture in times of war. Like the missing amber room of Russia or the treasures of Troy, it has entered the realm of myth, where truth and imagination intertwine. Though the Honjo Masamune has vanished, its legacy remains unbroken. To this day, it is remembered as a pinnacle of Japanese swordsmithing, the crown jewel of Masamune's genius. In museums, sword exhibitions, and history books, its story is told with reverence, as if the blade itself still watches over the nation. For the Japanese people, the Honjo Masamune represents more than a missing artifact. It is a reminder of a time when craftsmanship was sacred, when warriors lived and died by ideals of honor, and when a single blade could embody the spirit of a people. Its loss is mourned not just as theft or disappearance, but as a fracture in cultural memory. Yet the mystery also keeps it alive. Unlike swords locked in glass cases, the Honjo Masamune is still a subject of active imagination. Could it reappear one day? Will it resurface in a private collection? Or is it hidden in plain sight, misidentified among ordinary swords? The hope of discovery lingers, giving the sword a second life as legend. Japan has sought its return for decades. Historians and officials continue to investigate leads, though none have borne fruit. International sword collectors and martial arts communities keep watch, waiting for the day when the blade might emerge. But even in absence, the Honjo Masamune is present. Its story continues to inspire writers, filmmakers, and artists. It stands as a symbol of loss, but also of resilience. For every mention of it, the blade is reborn in memory, sharper than steel, untouchable by time. The truth may never be known. Perhaps it lies forgotten in a dusty American attic. Perhaps it rests secretly in Japan, guarded as it has always been. Or perhaps it was destroyed, existing now only in the echoes of history. Whatever its fate, the Honjo Masamune remains Japan's most legendary lost sword, a treasure that transcends material form. Its mystery ensures that it will never truly vanish. The blade, forged in fire centuries ago, continues to cut through time itself, reminding us that legends do not die. They endure, waiting for the day when they might rise again. If you enjoyed uncovering the mystery of the Honjo Masamune, Japan's lost legendary sword, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Crit Stories. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a tale of history's greatest legends and mysteries.